that this story is extremely difficult to tell because this story positively took place when I was not a believer, one, and I was not a father. So the fact that I can talk about this right now, it brings me actually great pain because, one, I just know what I've contributed to in the world prior to knowing Jesus Christ. And two, I have a daughter now, so the way, and a wife, so the perception of what I want my daughter to think about me is, I want her to know two things. I want there to be some kind of contradiction between this, is that I don't want to deny what my past and not knowing Jesus. So I don't want to hide that from her, the fact that I was divorced or the fact that I cheated on her mother. But on the other hand, I want her to be so utterly confused by when I tell her how bad I was to where I am right now. The fact that I have love, the fact that I have peace, the fact that I have joy, the fact that I've defeated alcoholism, the fact that I've defeated the sexual compulsions in my life. I want her to find a huge disparity between that. So it's something that I work for every day. But I live in South Korea, and this is not to justify this story, but I will say this, like, prostitution is a lot more prevalent and socially accepted here. They're quite out in the open in a lot of countries I've been to, and I would have never, ever, ever in any circumstance saw myself getting a prostitute, because my issue wasn't like that I needed to run to prostitutes because I couldn't meet women. That wasn't at all. It's that I had an intimacy issue with women because I was abused by a woman growing up. So I could fornicate, I could have sex with a woman, but I couldn't sleep with a woman. So I couldn't sleep in the same bed as them. So if a girl came over, I went to another girl's house, I would either have to leave, or if I didn't leave, I wouldn't be able to sleep in the same bed as them. And that's a horrible backdrop to the story, but it's true and it's relevant because I actually just got myself into a situation the first time where I was forced into getting a prostitute. And you're going to say, how can you get forced into doing that? Well, I literally got locked into a room and literally locked into a room, and there were 3 prostitutes wearing, out of all things, they were wearing wedding dresses. The depravity now, when I think about it now, because this happened 12 years ago, they were sitting on the floor, which is even weirder, but I tried to leave, and they're like, no, you're gonna do this or you're not leaving. So I did it, and I literally walked out of there, and I was like catching the vomit in my mouth. Like I was nauseous, like I almost fainted, and I was stumbling away. I'm like, I cannot believe that just happened. But suffice to say that after several months, I found myself with like a full-on out compulsion to where I was visiting these red light districts sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. So brings me such pain to talk about that. But on the other hand, it's like, in God there's light. So I can talk about this issue because I know that someone will benefit from it, and I know that I know I'm certainly not the only one who deals with intimacy issues. But I do want to share this experience because I didn't tell anyone about this story that I'm about to say for a full 7 years from after it happened. So that was like 5 years ago that I even told anyone. But I'm telling what happened because I wind up going to the Philippines because they have there which what they would call is like sexual tourism. And what sexual tourism is that people go to some poor countries like Costa Rica or Mexico, and they go for the express intent of being a tourist, but also getting prostitutes. And in South Korea, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, like it's like let's just say it's like $70, like to get a prostitute. But if you were to go to the Philippines for like $50, for $50 you could drink and eat and you know, and also have a woman. So it's so painful talking about this, because I know one day, and I know I'm not perfectly okay with it, but I want my daughter to know that I have the courage to talk about this, even though it's not convenient, even though it makes me look bad. I want her to, that's part of like my love for my daughter, is I want her to know that I've taken on this issue and I'm speaking out for the women who are forced into that lifestyle. Because I'm going to talk a bit more about what I saw down there. Because I went down there to the Philippines, and I was not a believer, but literally the first night I'm there, I'm having sex with this prostitute, and I just stop, and and I tell her, this is wrong. And she's like, I remember she just could not understand what I was trying to say. She was like, why is it wrong? And I was like, it's like, you know, like, if I have some kind of disease, I could be killing you, you know? And another thing too is, like, I wasn't a believer, but I saw she had a cross on her neck. And I was very drunk at the time, but I was like, you know, I'm like, Jesus wouldn't approve of this. And I could see she was just kind of like I caught her off guard, but she was like upset about it, you know, because she probably was a Christian now that I think about it. And but I didn't know what else to say, honestly, because she couldn't understand why it was wrong. It was like so natural for her. Anyway, so I literally just put my clothes back on, and I just started throwing up everywhere, and I wanted to leave and going back to my hotel. And we were supposed to go to a resort the next day, but I wound up just spending all my time in the slums, like playing chess and basketball and buying the people food and ice cream and drinks. And they were like, I remember everyone was like, why are you here? And I'm like, they probably never saw like a white person there in the slums, but actually, like, you know, I like being in those kind of environments, honestly. I like being around those people. It kind of like lifts up my spirit. But what wound up happening is I wind up spending my time there, and the last day I was there, I wound up like getting a prostitute, and I just said, hey, look, we don't have to have sex. I said, like I just want to hear what you have to say. So she told me about her story, and she told me that like her husband, or the person she was with, was like an alcoholic, and he would beat her, and they split up. He was cheating on her, and then she had a child, and he wasn't helping out financially, and she was just like crying, and she was telling me about how much she hated. She's like, I hate my job. I wish I could be back at home with my child right now, because I have to get drunk and have sex with guys who I've never met before in my life. But I can't get another job here that would support my family, you know. And I mean, if this story is bad, you think bad about me, just know this. I told her I would help her quit her job by sending her money to start up a business, right? So she probably didn't believe me, but when I went back to Korea, I called my dad, and I'm like, hey Dad, I need to send some money to the Philippines, because he had access to my bank account. So he wound up like Western Unioning the money over to this person. And I remember him asking, he's like, Isaiah, like, why are you sending money to the Philippines? And I was like, well, obviously didn't want to tell him what I was doing down there. And I was trying to get some kind of, how do you call it, like atonement. And so I'm like, Dad, one of my friends is stuck down there in the Philippines, so I'm just trying to help him out. And he's like, oh, okay. So he sent the money. But let's just say flash forward, like, as I'm getting ready to leave to go back to South Korea, I make one last stop into the slums, and I literally give away everything I have. I mean, I give away my bracelets, like $300. I give away my clothes. I literally take off my shoes, and I give away my shoes, and I buy some flip-flops. I give away my toiletries. My bag is completely like deflated, because there's nothing in it. So I gave away all my money, and then I took a taxi to the airport, and And then I tipped the taxi driver the rest of the cash that I had, because I'm like, oh, I got plenty of money back in South Korea, thousands of dollars in the bank. So then I get into there, and they're like, you have to pay an exit fee to leave the country. And you know, I'm American, so you can kind of like get away with some stuff, like being an American. They like, you can kind of get some VIP treatment sometimes. So I'm like, oh, you know, like I'm not really thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, well, you know, I'm like, oh, I don't have any money. I just spent all my money, da da da. And they're like, well, you need to pay this. So I was like, well, can I use my credit card? They're like, no. I was like, well, do you have an ATM machine here? They're like no. And I literally think that they wanted me to miss this flight, honestly, but to boost business or something. But so I started asking people, and I'm like, hey, can you, because it's like $7. It wasn't even that much money, but because they're like, if you don't pay this, you're not leaving this country. So I asked everyone just gave me the cold shoulder and just walked on. And I'm like, please guys, I'm like, here, I'll give you my digital camera. It's worth like hundreds of dollars. I'm like, just let me get this flight. And they're like, no. And I'm like, look, let me give you my card. When we get back to Korea, your crew can pull out an extra $100 for this. You know, and they were like, you're not getting on this flight unless you pay this money. So everyone had to board it, and I was like, oh my God, I've just given away all my money, and there's nothing in my bags, but I'm like sweating so much because it's so hot in the Philippines, and I look in all my bags, and there's nothing in there. There's positively nothing in there, and I had my money on me, so why I would look in my bags was just, I think I was just very nervous. And they're kind of just standing around me, like they're looking at me, and I'm thinking, I literally cussed God. I'm an atheist at the time, but I'm like, F you, mother, effing blank. I said, I promise you, I will never do one thing as long as I live. Which is so stupid when I think about it, because I didn't even believe in God, but I guess I did believe in God, but then the anger came to myself. I was like, Isaiah, you stupid effing this, you did these things for these people you'll never see again. You gave away all of this stuff, and you don't even know these people. And like, I'm just beating myself up in my mind. And so I said, fine. I said, all right, I'm gonna miss this flight. And I calculated it real quick between getting another flight, a hotel, and everything. I'm like, okay, this is probably gonna cost me $1,000. But I'm like, all right. And I said, I don't want these people to see me missing this flight. So I said, okay, I'm just gonna leave. And I stand up, and as I stand up, the Holy Spirit tells me flat out, look inside of your bag one more time. And I'm taking one step, and I'm like, I don't know where that's coming from, but I just looked in my bag 3 times, and I know there's nothing in there because I gave everything away, and I know how much money I had, and I gave it away. But anyway, I unzipped the bag, and there was one note and one coin that equaled the exact amount that I needed. And I saw that, and I was like, but as soon as I thought that, I thought, if I don't get up in this second right now, I'm gonna miss this flight. So I jumped up, and I ran to the counter, and the staff are looking at me like they're totally blown away. And so I wound up, running across the airport, and I mean, it looked like directly from a movie, because as the doors closed, I yelled, hey, and I got on, and I was breathing heavily, and I was so emotionally exhausted from everything I'd experienced, but I sat down, and I was like, oh my God, I know God exists. I know God exists because 1, I know something spoke to me, and then 2, I'm 1,000,000,000% positive that nothing was in that thing, because I looked in it 3 times out of nervousness. And I cannot believe that the next thing happened right now. Like, this is more crazy than that thing that happening. Because as I sat there, I said, I literally had this exact conversation. Well, it wasn't a conversation, but I literally told God, I said, okay, I know you exist. You clearly just proved that you exist. And I said, you're not taking a hint. I am not going to serve you. I don't care what you do. I'm literally like the prodigal son. The Bible talks about the prodigal son, how he went off till he could get prostitutes. And I'm like, I'm here for a reason, and I'm not going to serve you. And now that I think about that, it was 6 years. I didn't become a Christian for 6 years after that fact, because that was in 2008, and I became a Christian in 2004. So afterwards, I called my dad, and I was like, right after I became a Christian, I was like, Dad, I need to have a conversation with you. And I said, do you remember when you sent that money to that person from the Philippines? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you what actually happened down there. And it was very painful because I was in Asia so that I could do anything I wanted to do and not have to worry about my parents or people saying, oh, isn't that the minister's kid? It brings me great pain to say that, but I do want people to be aware that hey, this is happening in the world, and when you don't deal with the problems in your life, this sexual abuse that you might experience or the intimacy, that stuff gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse with time. After I became a Christian, I had to get counseling for 1 year to deal with my intimacy issues because, I couldn't sleep in the same bed as my wife. As horrible as that sounds, there's so many other things that wind up happening. I was cheating on my wife, had a girlfriend, then I was cheating on my girlfriend, and I was cheating on that girl. And that just is where sin will take you to. Would I have ever seen a scenario that first time in which I had that kind of compulsion to where I was going to other countries to do stuff like that? I couldn't have ever seen that scenario happening, but it happened, and I got help, and my counselor told me in my counseling that you're only as sick as your secrets. So Jesus Christ is the light of the world, and if you expose your sins to his light and you're honest and open about it, he can and will heal you.